Hello, hello. Welcome to our panel, whose title I've already forgotten. It's a good thing it's up here. Toss your dice, not your controller, adapting your favorite video game to TTRPGs. So I am Pam Punzalan. I am a queer Filipina currently based in Canada. You can find me everywhere on the Dovetailer. And the top three games that I'm trying to adapt or have already adapted or want to adapt would be Final Fantasy XIV, the critically acclaimed MMORPG, Devil May Cry, because that thing informed my sexuality in ways that I cannot describe, and Near Automata. Those are the three games that I really want to adapt right
Wow.
now. So I'm going to let everybody else do their intros. Liana, would you like to start?
Yeah, absolutely. Hello, my name is Leanna McKenzie. I am a game designer. I own Valorous Games, so we publish Valor, which is a kind of anime JRPG inspired sort of grid, but also a narrative system. I actually do a lot of mini adaptations for Valor because I kind of cheated and made like the perfect system in my eyes to do these kinds of things. So I've done things like we did like Monster Hunter, which I haven't actually played Monster Hunter, but people who played Monster Hunter liked it, so that was good. I've done Persona, and I recently did a Fire Emblem mod that I'm kind of tinkering with because I'm having a lot of fun with.
Wax, go ahead.
Yeah. So hi, I'm Wax. I'm a Filipino poet, game designer, novelist based in Manila right now. Uh, you can find me as Makapatag. So I wrote Maharlika, Karanduon, Gubat Banwa, all like Southeast Asian inspired games. Particularly, I love tactics games. Right. If we go into like the top three games, I've actually technically already adapted Tactics Ogre, which is my favorite like game of all time, into Gubat Banwa. So it's like a Southeast Asian Tactics Ogre. But I am really interested, particularly in sort of translating um, like Breath of the Wild, right? Like everyone wants to do that, but I kind of want my own spin on that as well. And I also want to do like a very like a Monster Hunter game for sure. That's more Rise than old Monster Hunter. It's almost like a fighting game technically. But yeah, that's me.
Colette, go ahead first.
All right. Hi, I'm Colette. I am a Chinese Cambodian game designer, writer, based in LA or California. Um, I am currently finishing up my thesis at USC in interactive media and games. I'm defending in 20 days. um, and I am doing digital stuff at USC, but my heart and kind of like where I got my start is in tabletop. So I'm bouncing in both worlds. My thesis actually draws a lot on design from tabletop, which is an interesting thing to look at. But in terms of like top three games I'm trying to adapt, I like Dragon Age because I love Dragon Age and I know there's a tabletop RPG out there. But I just think about it all the time. The other one is Yakuza slash Like a Dragon. I love that game so much, and I think it's perfect to adapt because there's just so much you can do. Um, and my last one, which is like a shame, there's unofficial stuff, but not like official, and I'm kind of surprised that there isn't. Elder Scrolls, because I think that's also wild. You can talk to me all the time about Elder Scrolls lore too, because it's bonkers. It's a little bit there's a lot of stuff going on. But yeah, that's my overview for me. Oh, I didn't even talk about tabletop stuff. I worked on anthologies like Uncaged, and I recently worked on Pathfinder with the Tiansha book, which is really, really exciting. And I've done a bunch of 5e adaptation anthology adventures as well. I did it.
I did the thing. Hey, last but definitely not the least, Adira, go ahead.
Hello, hi, I'm Indira Slattery. I'm a trans Jewish game designer over in Chicago. And I'm a zine-ster, I'm a poet. I do all sorts of weird gay shit. I've done some tabletop work adapting various games. I spitefully adapted Dark Souls. I have a Borderlands adaptation. I've played a little bit of Borderlands, about an hour. That's about enough to adapt a game, right? And then I'm also have done some work with companies professionally, helping them adapt their video games to tabletop. Can't really talk about that because of NDAs and things. But yeah, As far as three video games that I would really want to adapt to tabletop, Hollow Knight. Love me some little bug guys. Yeah, I, like Wax, love tactics things. So like I basically any tactics game, Tactics Ogre, Final Fantasy Tactics, Banner Saga. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So we're gonna jump right into it. I'm aware that people will be asking questions in Twitch, and that's totally cool. We're gonna like try to go into it while we're talking. But what we wanted to get out there first, because this is basically why I think everybody's here, right? Is what do each of us consider essential with respect to adapting a video game to a TTRPG? Because there is no easy question design wise to that. You can't just go like, hey, stick it in, go there, done, right? It's not gonna happen. So that's why we have like a variety of people on this panel today, like because in a way some of us have different. What we've noticed when we came around was that we had different ways of saying it, but kind of similar stuff too, with like different variations. So who wants to go first with what they consider essential? Anybody? Liana, you wanna go for
No
it?
volunteers, I'll go.
You can go ahead and go first. That's fine. I'll go after you.
Okay.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, a big part to me that's like essential about adapting sort of like any media, whether that's like adapting a video game or like a book or anything like that, is like thinking about I used to be a programmer, so we had these things called user stories, right? Which like described like how different people would like use these things and like how they would feel about it, how they would interact with it, and stuff like that. And so that's to me the big sort of like thing. Pam has described this as like player fantasy before as well. I think that's a fabulous sort of like turn of phrase and things. I like to refer to it as mouth feel, like if you're gonna chew on the game, will it taste the same?
Yeah, to go a bit into player fantasy, because apparently the theory is called a story stack theory. It was piloted around like narrative game design critique and GDC people. The idea that you can have flexible little parts to your video game, but like the least flexible is what you're trying to say, what you're trying to make your players feel and taste and be and get immersed in. That's like the least flexible. You can't change it. And then the second least flexible is your system, because every time you change the code, you're going to have a lot of tired programmers screaming at you or wishing you dead, right? So just you can't touch that. Once the mechanics are fleshed out, there's no going back. And then the most flexible is how the narrative is communicated. It's much easier to tell your scriptwriter, please change that word, it doesn't fit, versus telling the programmer, please expand your text box, right? Like those two very different things. So that was like my main thing, the player fantasy. Like a game gives you a certain mood, a certain ambiance, and a certain list of like, this is what you do, this is what you don't do, this is where you have to go. Like if you can't capture that in your TTRPG, is it really an adaptation? Is where the question lies. And please know that there's no real answer to that. Also, it's more of just like something you have to keep in the back of your head, right? When it comes to adaptation. So who else wants to share what else they feel is essential? We have mouthfeel, player fantasy, things you can or cannot compromise, and the narrative being the most flexible. Wax, you want to chime in?
Yeah, actually this is something I've been thinking. Same thing with Adira. Like, I think it's something we have to think about when adapting all kinds of media, right? Personally, when I think about video games, uh, like half of the time people do come at it for like the vibes and the atmosphere, right? Like a lot of time, like Dark Souls, people love Dark Souls because of the vibes and the atmosphere, right? Like it's such a good narrative. But a lot of times, well, people really like particular games because of like the mechanics that they have in them, right? And the fiction or the stories or narratives that can come out of that. And I think sometimes when you're adapting like a video game, into an RPG. You have to sort of think whether you want to adapt like the entire thing as a holistic thing, or if you want to adapt like the mechanics of it and how that might create new narratives in a different medium, stuff like that. I think as with tactics games, again, I've only been playing tactics games recently, but as with tactics games, a lot of the time, tactics players love the mechanics of tactics games. Um, someone once compared tactics games as they're sort of like roguelikes, which is really like an interesting thing. But when you look at it, it's like these short bursts of gameplay that have like meaningful stories in them, right? That's what tactics games are. Like the entire fight would take 30 minutes to an hour, but that's like an entire gameplay session already. There's no like exploration or anything, and people really like that. And sometimes when adapting it to an RPG, you have to take into account, I think, like if you want to adapt that kind of not the feel, but like if you want to adapt the mechanics because you love it so much and you want to see it in a different kind of medium, there's something to be said about how the guessing game of fighting games, right, is this super fast thing. But when you do it in an RPG setting, in a tabletop setting, it can be a lot more methodical. It can be a lot more analytic, and that's just the mechanics coming from it. Because I've done a lot of stuff that's like talking about vibes and atmosphere a lot. Like I'm a huge proponent of, if you want to adapt something, even the text of your game has to have that vibe, right? Like you can't just use any word, right? It has to have the vibe of the game you're trying to adapt, or the book, or the whatever you're trying to adapt. So yeah, I think that's what I would think is kind of essential, is like just an approach, not just approach, but also what you're trying to bring right into the medium. So yeah.
So Liana, you also had like an idea, right, about what would be essential to adapting.
Yeah, so I've actually kind of got a process for myself, just because I think about this a lot. I do this a lot. For me, a lot of it comes down to obviously picking the system that you're going to use. That's always going to be a major component. Obviously, I tend to use my own system because I know it well. But if I were to be designing for D&D or for Fate Core or something like that, understanding the strengths of the system, and then kind of understanding the strengths or the engagements, kind of as Wax was saying, of the game you're trying to adapt. So when I do this, what I do is I'll sit down and I'll look at the core engagements. So for my system, I know what my core engagements are. Like I know what someone's going to get out of playing Valor. And if I'm picking a game to adapt, I also will start putting out a list of core engagements for that game. So I think I was using the example of Pokemon in one of our chats, where it's like, okay, what do people expect to be able to do if you're going to be playing in a Pokemon game? Well, they want to catch monsters. They want to be able to battle people, possibly fight some evil team, put that in the maybe section. All the Pokemon need to be unique, right? They need to have kind of their own builds and personalities. Shared move pool, maybe that's something we can look at, possibly save some time there. You start putting together this image of what a game is, and then kind of stripping it down to like, why do people come back to this game? What is it about this game that makes them want to play it? And then what do I, as the designer, not have a choice about including? If this is something that someone expects from this game, then my adaptation must capture all of these core points. So once I have that list, and then I can compare that list against the core engagements of the system that I've chosen to see, okay, where do I have agreement? Where do I have disagreement? What works? What doesn't? Is this actually the right system that I'm using? Would another system be more suitable? And then from there, once I've married those lists of the two engagements, then I go into the actual mechanics of like, okay, here's all my design work that I need to do to bring this chosen system up to the task of simulating this video game in its feel and function.
Man, like listening to you all is like, damn, the hell am I doing in my own adaptation, right? Colette, before we move on to like questions or like responses to each other, please give us your own take on like what the essential aspects are to adapting.
Yeah, so I think a lot of you have said like various things, which are awesome. I think also to add on, I think something what Adira said about like design or like the feel, the mouse feel, like I doubt you can figure it out I'm sure that you can find them laying around somewhere, but a lot of like digital game design, I'm sure a lot of us in tabletop also do the same. But like trying to figure out what their design goals are in a digital aspect, because that's kind of like I said, that's the themes, that's the guiding principles of how um not only like the systems and the design, like the systems, the mechanics, but also kind of like the theming comes down to kind of those goals or the pillars that they want. Um and there's obviously the same thing like mechanics, things that have like um it's like understanding what are the main things people want to do in those games is very essential, because we could, for example, like things that have like many systems, and I think if you boil down, a lot of digital games have a lot of systems involved. It's wild. That there's so many things, especially in larger games, have so many different systems, like crafting systems, and then there's like subsystems of crafting. Understanding what are the main things you want and putting them in the book, because like we've all played D&D. There's a lot of systems in it. Pretty sure we don't use some of them, like maybe swimming. Like there's some systems that players will eventually just not use. And kind of like not necessarily like taking those out like preemptively, but like understanding what's the main thing that they want. Um, and also kind of like understanding what the main thing players want as kind of like what they want to see in the world. Because I think setting a lot of things as well, or people are interested in kind of like the setting spaces as well, and who they want to be within that world. Especially in games that are not MMO based or like open world, like understanding why would they want to play a game that technically is more focused on like a person, for example.
Gosh, we all kick ass here. That's like my only critical
yeah.
assessment so far, right? So let's go into some of the. If we're all cool with it, we can start looking at the questions that we started receiving. For your own personal interest projects, what's the aspect you want to capture most of all, and what you can import into a tabletop setting? Okay, I'll start with this because I'm like neck deep into trying to adapt FF14, right, which is an MMO. And tragically, when I did my market research, you've got 100 D&D to FF14 adaptations, but the game does not work in that system at all. Like it's more like they kind of tried to force all of the beauty and interest of FF14 into a system, into a code that makes it gibberish. So the aspect that I tried to distill, which goes back to the idea of player fantasy, is answering the question: what does it mean to be the warrior of light, and how do I mechanically put that in? So what I'm trying to do now is using all of the modular and granular aspects of playing an MMO, and then making, as Colette said, different subsystems for it. So we have your stats, and then origin is important. Like, what city state do you come from? Because you're literally asked that in game. Like, where did you come from? Then your race. And then, curiously, I removed levels. The only thing that you'll level up are your different stats. Can you buy more armor? Do you need more inventory? And then do you want to increase your I guess your triggers on how you use your dynamis, which is kind of like the power of your soul. Like, anybody who's played Final Fantasy will remember the idea of the limit break, right? 14 expanded the narrative behind that completely, and they bolted it into the world itself. And I cannot say more because I'm going to spoil everybody who wants to play, but that's basically what they did. So I was like, then that means that tabletop wise, I need to make a token based system. But what I'm going to do with the tokens is, to be a warrior of light means that you are in a constant situation of desperation. That's how I interpreted it. So therefore, the power of your soul is powered by the strife, the conflict, the consequences, the damage, the trauma, or even your selfish decisions. And then when you spend that to help people, that's when you can make your heroic sacrifices or your interesting choices. So it's a constant resource management juggling, which I hope emulates the way it feels to play an FF14. You got to get that gear, you got to grind that stuff, you have to buy those things, like all of it. But it all ties back to trying to respond to the question, what does it mean to be a warrior of light in a world of warriors of light who are not always heroes? Sometimes you're just an adventurer who wants to make some gil, right? So I guess that I hope that answers it in a concrete but also philosophical way. Who wants to like tackle the question too, like for your own personal interest projects? Wadira, you want to
Yeah,
go?
yeah.
Okay.
So like Hollow Knight, right? A lot of people when they think about Hollow Knight, they think about like you got like melee attacks and spells and whatnot and things like that. But to me, that's the least important aspect to like adapt. The most important aspect is about being a little guy, and like running around in a world filled with other little guys who are all doing weird little bug stuff. Like, yeah, like I think mechanics are not necessarily like super important as far as like direct translations and things like that, you know. um, uh, like Pam talked about like removing levels and things like that from FF14 and like having this sort of like focused token economy and things like that. That it's like when you're adapting a game, a nice thing is to be able to just like steal some of the words and then just tack them onto to other things, because that will just sort of immediately create that sort of association between the player's mind, right? Like if I have a little stack of poker chips and I'm told that this is my like soul, my like resource that I spend for healing and spells and things, it's like, oh sweet, I know that's cool. But also if I'm told like I have a hand of cards and that's my soul, like sweet. It's all about like trying to get that sort of like feel correct. That's where I'm at. Yeah.
All right. Who wants to tackle the question? Liana, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I can add a bit. So one of the nice things about personal projects is either it's something that you already really love, or that you are very disappointed for and are doing a hate redesign. Either way, what I like to focus on is I ask myself the question of why. So if it's something I really love, it's like, why do I love this, and how do I want to show that love to other people so that they will also love this thing that I love, or so that the people who also love this thing that I love won't, murder me in my sleep because I did it wrong. And then if it's a hate redesign, it's what bugs me so much about this, what didn't work that I need to fix. So what for things like this, it's always like, is this something I would love if not for these things that ruined it? So it's trying to be very centered around the idea of, it's like, what was I hoping to see that I didn't see? And then in this redesign, how am I going to focus on those positive aspects that I so desperately wanted, and remove the negative stuff, like when I'm doing my Trails of Cold Steel Kiseki adaptations. Like, I love a lot about this game, but also someone's super into his stepsister on the writing team. Let's put that aside because I don't want to deal with that.
I felt that because like FF14 has a lot of bolted in bioessentialism, like a lot, and then the world is still very white to white coded, so that deeply bothers me. And that's part of why I wanted to do ancestry mixing, and that's kind of where my design is going right now. Like, people get no bonuses or no negatives for being a particular race, because we all understand that that is a concept, and if it's a concept, it doesn't have to go into your game, right? You can
It's
use
functionally not means nothing in the game already, right? So like you're free.
yeah, so why is it there, right? That's
Like,
what's
it's entirely cosmetic, but
Yeah.
then the players have attached their own meaning to it, like how
Yeah.
Lalafell are adorable and evil, for
Yeah,
example.
but they're just tiny. They people, and then this is a whole new conversation. Anyway, I'm gonna stop taking up space because, like, Wax, you want to talk about the aspect you wanted to capture most of all?
Yeah, real quick. Actually, just jumping off of what Liana said about hate redesigns, I've been working on and off for like 3 years now, I think, on a Sekiro RPG because I love Sekiro. I love Sekiro so much. But yeah, I could never quite get like the feel down. And at that point, I actually have to like. There was a point where I had to sort of re-look at how I ran RPGs or how I played RPGs or what I thought RPG should be like, right? It's one of those kinds of projects. I know everyone has those kinds of projects where you just have to turn your head on the preconceptions you have on RPGs. But yeah, that's I just wanted to bounce off of hate redesign because that's so right. Like, why can't I get it right? But I think I'll be able to get it right soon because I've been able to have I do like IRL martial arts, right? FMA martial arts. And I've been able to apply a lot of the things I learned there, like translate it to the table. And hopefully I'll be able to do justice to a Sekiro sort of like rhythm combat RPG kind of game. Um, but yeah, I just want to say the hate redesign, so true, so true.
Uh, Colette, you want to take us away before we move on to the next question?
Yes, I could. I would. This is because I was thinking about this the whole time, and kind of to jump off in terms of like removing things of systems. I was thinking about because of Yakuza. It's interesting. That game is very interesting. But the themes, a lot of it is about like technically marginalized folk in Japan, but specifically kind of like more societal rather than there's a lot of issues of xenophobia and essentially kind of like there's a lot of misogynistic, homophobic, transphobic stuff that they've done better on in the newer games, but it's still like very much like needs some work. But funny enough, because the most recent Yakuza is an RPG, they decided to be like, you know what we're gonna do? Instead of a beat 'em up, we're just gonna make an RPG, and it has a class system and everything, which is super funny. It's a great game. Um, but for like an advice for that, for like adapting, also I think also that I do, especially in this when I'm thinking about it, is I like looking at memes for the game because it you look at what people remember, or like moments that they remember about the game, and you get to take that and put them in their game. Obviously, you have the systems, the mechanics, but like things that you remember about it. Like for example, Yakuza, their side stories. No one cares about the main story because it's too serious. But everyone remembers like karaokeing. They remember like the weird stories that are like side quests. They remember all of that, and like that's kind of like the gem of the game. And you can do that with basically anything, any game. It has some sort of like meme potentiality that you can look at, and I think that's really important to be able to capture the soul of any game.
Yeah.
Oh gosh.
With,
Yeah. Go ahead, Adira.
yeah, whenever I work with like a company to help them adapt a tabletop, or like as like a consultant for that or things like that, the first thing I do, especially if it's a game that like I haven't played or something like that, I go to Reddit and I go to Twitch, and like I just type the name of the game into Twitter. I go to Tumblr, I go to AO3. AO3 is a big one as far as like because that shows like the character relationships that people care about and things like that. Um, like yeah, memes. Fuck yeah.
Yeah, because like at the end of the day, right? Some of a video game is such a long investment too, because it's something that a lot of like game design discourse talks about. For somebody to invest time into the game that you created means that they took so much time away from other endeavors to immerse in your product. And yet that immersion doesn't mean that they have 100% recall, but those specific shining moments, those things that made them feel things, the things that made them laugh, the things that made them spend further time to create a fucking meme that a lot of people also resonated with, those are your core touchstones. Like, how do you emulate that in a TTRPG, which suddenly has so much more space to create unique narratives that respond, subvert, converse, spitefully disagree with the original design, right? Like that, those are the things that you have to, yeah, memes. We just like all of our favorite games have so many. No one else gets it. But like when you meet somebody who's played the game, you show the meme, they're like, yo, right? Like that moment, your TTRPG has to have those things in it, right? Oh, Liana, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, just because I've seen some stuff in the chat, so I wanted to get this out before. Because we've been talking so much about like rhythm and like musical style of games. One thing I did want to point out, and something I look at if I'm trying to capture the feel of that, there is an expression of music that is pen and paper focused, and that is musical notation. So if you can read sheet music, for example, you know what a written song looks like. So just my encouragement, if you are looking at kind of that rhythmic focus, is go back to the written music, and then you can use that as sort of a conceptual base for how you're going to build out the flow of your game mechanically.
Also, dice make sound when you roll them.
Yeah. And also poetry, like what Wax was saying, like the specificity and weight of the words you choose. Every game has that language bolted into its UX and what it calls things. You say Gil, anyone with FF will be like, right, immediately like, I know what that is, right? Like the specificity of your language. And the TTRPGs, a lot of TTRPGs like to universalize that, move away from that if you're going to go into adapting your game. Find the specificity of the game you want to adapt, look at its lexicon and its language, look at the rhythm, the beat of the music, the feel, put it in. And do not be afraid if it's not perfect. You did the thing. You loved it enough to do the thing. That's enough. Maybe you'll inspire more people to do more things. And then you could both be memes together going, holy shit, right? You put it together, like, you're a fucking genius. Also, AO3, magic. Is it, are you going to see a lot of interesting things? Sex? Yes. But that is also important, okay, to the adaptation. Face it, your adaptation is a fan product, fan fantasy, right? I don't think I need to say more on that because we have questions and more time. So Colette wanted to jump us off into obvious elements that shouldn't be included. I think some of us already kind of talked about that, right? Like FF14's bioessentialism, designing out of spite, like the things like I have a deep love-hate relationship with FF15. That game hurt me. It had such great potential. And then it just like, what the hell happened? Right. So, and then I know other Final Fantasy fans have this great love hate relationship with 12. Others have it with 13. Right. And there are many different reasons why we have those specific moments of like, I love this so much, but I also hate the way that things were executed. I hate what happened to X character. I hate that this aspect is so problematic, right? Like, since it's an individual act of adaptation, get your hard lines in order is my advice. Like, what are the things that truly made you unhappy? And what made you unhappy enough to be spiteful enough to do a total redo and share it with the world and go, this is my shit, right? Because that's how I'd answer that question. What made you, as the fan, unhappy enough that it kept you up at night and you had to share it with your friends? Throw it in your game. Does anyone else have something to add to obvious elements that shouldn't be included?
I can
Colette, go ahead.
Yeah. We kind of reiterated in the previous ones in a more technical sense, but like, yeah, understanding what systems you don't need in the game, and you can just kind of like, is the whole idea of now that in terms of like for tabletop as opposed to digital, there's a GM you can kind of like on the fly interact or like change change the story or change like naturally flow with it. Like the whole like you now come in the box, you quote unquote, as in like with someone who's running the systems and everything. So like you don't like, for example, I'm just gonna use Yakuza as my touchstone for the game. Like as much as there's like a bunch of like mini games, it might be hard to incorporate every single one of them, or at least like have a general section of like there's not like 80 systems for every single mini game you would do, instead of maybe generalizing them into one or like doing various systems on that. So like yeah, the main thing of like is just not too many systems. And I think in terms of like a storytelling and narrative element, I wouldn't say don't include, but think really hard on cameo stuff. Like if you have things of like Yakuza, our good friend Kiryu, do you want him? Because do you want a possibility for the players to see this character? Or like, is this about those cameo characters or the major characters? Locations, obviously, that's very obvious, but like, thinking about whether or not you want to have this kind of as a touchstone, because then it's going to be like, oh, players might end up being like, I want to interact with these characters only. And that, might take away from the experience of the game. But that's just something that you, as a designer, should think really hard about, that kind of part of it.
So I know we all might have more feelings on it, but like I want to make sure that we cover more of the questions. We can probably take other responses that we had to previous ones and drop it in the post panel chat. So I'm going to move on to: do you all prefer to work on official adaptations or more thinly veiled, transformative, not officially sanctioned adaptations? I actually want Adira to answer this question first because you're doing the consultation side.
Oh yeah, yeah. I definitely uh, prefer to just steal things. Yeah. Official adaptations are tough. You don't have as much freedom with like sort of losing some of the things like the bioessentialism in Final Fantasy XIV and things like that, because there's sort of this like established canon and things like that. At the same time, a lot of things within official adaptations are easier. Like if I was gonna officially like adapt Yakuza and stuff, I could just make it a game where when you play, you pick one of the Yakuza characters, and that's the character that you play. You don't have to worry about cameos and things like that. Um, like I could just decide that I want to take the Majima character sheet and do that. Like, um, so yeah, it's they both have like very different problems. Um, uh, I have a lot of fun stealing from games and just like doing like thinly veiled transformative things because it allows me a lot more creative freedom to like comment upon the like previous design and things like that. But like, I don't think there's anything wrong necessarily with official adaptions. It's just different problems.
Wax, you also didn't get to talk before I move on to Liana for the last question. Like, what do you prefer, official or like I'm gonna do my own thing?
My own thing always. That's just me. I think there's more flexibility and there's a lot more like transcreation when you're doing a thinly veiled version of a game. Like one of my favorite games recently that I haven't played much is Rune. It's like a solo game, and I think that was a pretty cool sort of like adaptation of like Elden Ring, right? Like I wouldn't have thought of it that way, but it was like a different interpretation of it that got the vibes down. So I think that's like that's pretty cool. Yeah, I think for me personally, I'd rather do these like transformative creations rather than official adaptations.
Liana, go ahead before I get to Colette.
Yeah, I just wanted to. So, full disclosure, I am a businesswoman as well. Like, I want to make Valorous games my full-time job someday. I am trying to position myself to be able to work on licensed products. So, I'm going to talk about business for a bit. Feel free to tune me out if you're more pure designers. That's totally fine. I get it. If you are doing an official adaptation, something that's added to your docket that you didn't have to consider for a personal adaptation is, are you capturing the feel of the property as perceived by that property's owner? And that can be very, very different from how you and the general fandom perceives that property. but you don't really have a choice at that point. You must capture what your client wants to see. It can be absolutely very lucrative. It could potentially make your entire studio, but that's a lot of pressure riding on that. So if you are looking to work on a more official adaptation, hopefully you are in a position to be sitting down with the property holders, being able to, through your proposals, kind of get a good feel for what do they expect of you. Because now you're not just working on your own, like, I think these are the important parts of the property. Now you may be trying to suss that list out from someone who wants money out of you, who wants you to do something profitable for them. And they may not have the language to tell you what they expect, but those expectations will still be there. So you need to be very cognizant to it. When you are doing this adaptation, fortunately or unfortunately, that client is the kind of the sole focus. You need to please them. And then hopefully after that's done, you can also work in things that also please yourself and please the fan base that you're hoping to build.
Yeah, I'll just jump in real quick before we get to Colette. That is the difficult part of it, really, when it comes to working on official adaptations. I too am under NDA for certain projects, and that is a big issue we're running into now because the source material we are looking at are things that a lot of us on the design team are kind of like about. So we're all okay. We're just lucky that we have people helping us make the business language. In the like they're looking at what we want and what we said. They heard us 100%, and they're like, okay, here's what we're gonna send. Do you agree? Like, does this capture and communicate what you're hoping for? And then when we gave the green light, they sent it, and they're like, okay, let's just see if it works out. But we've all agreed as a team that we cannot work on this unless the people who want to hire us are okay with it. If you ask my personal preference, I too also like doing my own thing. I'm a fangirl. If you found me on AO3, you will see many interesting things. Uh, and the very first TTRPG I did was a Grishaverse adaptation of Blades in the Dark. I did it for no money. Jath FF14 will be the same because obviously it's Square Enix and I don't want them to sue me. So I'm doing my own thing, right? That said, if people hired me to do it, I will. Mostly because I too want to pivot to the industry. I have bills to pay. I love video games. I love TTRPGs. That'd be the natural marriage between the two. But if I just had more time and I did not have those constraints, and if the interest wasn't so immediately tied to my survival, I just do my own transformative whatever all the time. Just put every single game out there. Finally write my Dark Souls like Bloodborne stuff. And you know why my relationship with that series is special? Because I can't fucking play the games. I'm so bad at them. And some of them have literal accessibility issues because I have near carpal tunnel. I can't play them. Me trying to play Code Vein had me unable to use my wrists for a week level. So it's a very real disability for me to play those games. But I love the aesthetic. So it's one of those things. But I don't want to take up too much space again. So Colette, go ahead. What do you prefer?
Make it real quick because I agree with you, Pam. I like doing more thinly veiled transformative because I think official works are there for a reason. I think being able to do transformative work and kind of take your own spin on it, and rather than following the expectations of a specific vision, because I think, obviously we're adapting one of our favorite games, but there's also that kind of preconceived like understanding of like I'm just putting myself into that world, and I think there's the pressure of being like this has to be like the game, and I think being able to thinly veil it in that world with like fun other systems and being transformative, I think it's a fun thing. But yeah, your girl got bills to pay too.
Okay, so we have, I think, space for one of the last questions. I'm just going to answer. Are you planning to adapt the MMORPG feeling of F14? Probably not. I'll get back to you in post chat because that's a whole TLDR and that's very specific to me. So the questions to the rest. Do you consider how subversion might interact with your systems? like players of the Devil May Cry RPG want to constantly negotiate Doctor Who style rather than stylishly fight. I want everybody else to answer that first while I chew on that. Does anybody want to go first?
Sure.
Okay, I guess Liana then Adira. That sound good?
Adira can go first. I talk a lot.
Okay, Adira. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. No, there is no such thing as subversion within how you play a role-playing game. There's no wrong way to play a game. Yeah. No.
That was sweet and simple. Liana, go ahead.
I may actually have to disagree a bit. Do you want how you need to determine for yourself how much time you want to spend design-wise on edge cases or things that you don't expect are going to be captured in the feel of the game you're making. So, do you want to include diplomacy mechanics in your Devil May Cry game? That's a design decision and that's a time decision. So, for you, you need to figure out, is this something I'm going to focus on or not? And that is going to in turn determine how your game is overall. Yeah.
Okay, Wax, go ahead before Colette.
I think it's kind of like a fusion of what Liana and Adira said. For me, is choosing to focus on a particular thing is like, it's not inherently, you can't really like subvert it, because you would still have something that encompasses it, I think. But it's not the focus of the game. So you can still play as a Doctor Who style. It's just not the sort of focus of the game. It's not what the game is built for. You might not, you will have fun in it, that's for sure, but you might not be interacting with all the nuts and bolts of what the game offers, which is fine for some people, and that's completely fine as well. I think it's all on the table.
Colette, you got something? Because I still don't have something, but go ahead.
Yes. I think, yeah, I would think I'm in the middle as well. Wow, look at us. I think players, we can't come up, like, we can never anticipate what someone would want to play. And I think that's okay, because sometimes it comes, I think those kind of like weird things, what brings like memories or experiences of playing is those like outlandish, like, can I seduce this vampire? And you're like, this is the final boss. What are you doing? And it works. Fun moments. But I think like looking at other systems and being very intentional of like how and like what you can do. Like, I don't think you'll be like you could be fist fighting someone in like good society. But it's very veiled as like a Victorian era like social style game. But like I think it's just like being intentional of like, what is being offered, I think is also designing around that intention. And I think players will then follow mostly, besides the very outlandish things that they'll do that we'll never anticipate.
I think now that I've really thought about it, the only person that I'm looking to satisfy at the end of the day with any of my adaptations is me. That's it. Unless it's an official adaptation in which they tell me, girl, this doesn't work and I'm paying you, I'm going to be like, okay. Then I have to change it, right? But if it's my own, I don't think about any of that. Like, you want to subvert it, go ahead, fine, whatever. But like, if I was happy with it, and maybe the 3 or other fangirl, fanboy, fan queer friends who saw it and were like, bitch, finish that game, if they're happy with it, I'm good. I think that's as far as I'll go. I'll never, this comes into wider design for me. I do not design specifically because I'm worried about antagonistic players or players who will break my system. I just don't. But that's a whole other panel, isn't it? And we only have 1 minute to go. So y'all can join us in the post-panel chat, provided that we are all free, because for some of us, it's like 3 a.m. almost. Like, shout out to Wax. So it was lovely having all of you. Thank you for being here. I'm going to just let everybody do a quick outro. I'm Pam Punzalan, Dovetailer. You can find me everywhere. Thank you for supporting Navathem's End. Yay, we funded. I have more things coming up. We can go for Liana first for outros.
Hey, Leon McKenzie, main designer, owner of Valorous Games. I like doing this. Thank you for having me, Pam. This is a lot of fun. Thank you.
Hey, Wax, go ahead.
Yeah, Wax, you can find me makapatag almost anywhere. Thank you for having me, Pam, as well. Go play Gubat Banwa.
Yes. Colette, go ahead.
Hi, Colette. You can find me on Twitter at my first name and last name. Like I said, designer, narrative, tabletop, quest, encounter stuff. I'm graduating in May. God willing, they don't kill me for my defense. So I'm very available for work. Someone has to pay those student loans at some point.
Dear, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Adir Slattery. Google me. First name, last name. That's it. This is fucking fun.
All right, see y'all. Take care.
Bye.